The Mirage, or at least the way that Kixeye has implemented the VXP targets, is just a little bit confusing. Today I'm going to straighten some of that out and show you the best build possible for the Mirage and a few things that you may want to consider before you actually start building it. Hey everyone, Derpy here, and welcome back to another Battle Pirates video. The first thing I'll start talking about is VXP Weekend. The previous VXP Weekend that happened was pretty buggy. Our anti-torpedoes were not firing, and some of our anti-mortars were not firing. Not that you're necessarily going to want to use those. The hull also needs 125 kVXP when it should just need 100 kVXP. It's usually the flagship that requires some extra ones. A bunch of things were pretty confusing. Some of the actual target strategy guide, which I don't think I'll get into this video, is just a little bit wrong and using something called true side, which is really just thermal. A bunch of stuff needs to be ironed out. It seems like this was probably a new game designer trying their best. But what I want to focus on today is the build that we know today for sure, and then the most likely thing based on the strategy guide and my interpretation of that they wrote. So let's go ahead and get started. I will also mention that because we asked, of course, so nicely, Kixeye is going to be running VXP Weekend again the week that I'm currently recording and posting this video on, starting on Friday, so that should give you all an early Christmas present and a chance for me actually to rank up some of my ships. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. Armor point starts out at 41.5 million. We don't actually know if the flagship will start out at more armor points or have fewer armor points. This is really important because a few of these torpedoes likely have King Killer on them, and if that's the case, you may want to build the flagship with a little bit more evade, but we don't know for sure on that one. Now the upgrades on this are pretty standard. We have a heavy weapon slot, which the heavy weapon looks to do pretty well, some explosive survival, concussive survival, etc., critical hit chance, and as a reminder, all these are modifications to the base stat, not things that apply like specials would have. So that's something you have to be aware of. By the way, this building damage comes from my Conquest Yard. You can pretty safely ignore that. Starting out, it does have a really nice evade, and of course that is nice. Extra defense here when submerged. So this is a submarine, and don't worry, you're not going to have to drive this like a normal sub of ducking in and out of sonar fields, although there will be some cow fields to be aware of. You can pretty safely ignore cloak efficiency and all those relevant stats. Thermal, or whatever they're calling it now, will pierce right through that one. And of course, the cloak time here is 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes or the entire battle. Therefore, you can pretty safely ignore cloak time as well. If something forces you to surface, you will stay surfaced and might need to stop or something like that to go back below water, which I believe I saw in one of the VXP targets. Regardless, you don't have to worry about cloak time or cloak efficiency. It's not a normal sub. You can kind of forget about that. And of course, you do get some extra survival bonus to every Mirage in the fleet. Not sure what they're going to name the flagship. Let's start talking about your regular weapons initially. So you're going to want to put 6 weapons on every ship. Your 2 options are actually the limited torpedo here. If I click on here, notice the damage is 5,600 and has countermeasure evade of 30%, range of 93. This 93 range is different than basically every other torpedo we have in the game, which is 88. So I think they just copied it over from something wrong, a Gatling gun maybe. Again, probably a new designer on this point doing their best, but it gives us a higher range, so I'm not going to complain. The regular torpedo does 5,200 damage, so very close. It might not actually be worth getting all the limited weapons this time, although there are some shards from the VXP target, which I suppose is nice. Now you can see the countermeasure evasion right at the bottom of your screen is only at 15% compared to 30%, so if you are ever in a situation where you need to put both limited and regular ones on your fleet, you're going to want to put the regular ones as far forward as possible and put the ones with the higher countermeasure evade as far forward as possible. That would be the limited ones. And the regular ones, if you do need to mix and don't have everything, further back. So putting 2 limited as far forward as you're going to and the rest regular will work better than putting the regular ones up front, although of course all limited will still be better than all regular. That is the normal weapons, and of course the U1 weapon, which I can't show you right now because this ship is only at U0, is the one you're going to want to use. Nothing too special about that one here. Now, let's discuss countermeasures. So in this target, there are mortars, rockets, and torpedoes. You might think then that you should equip the things that can deal with mortars, rockets, and torpedoes to this front ship. Now is also a good time to mention all my ships are not necessarily going to be built the same. However, this is an underwater hull, and therefore you need to take into account what can actually fire underwater. If you hover over some things like the Cormorant, for instance, this says can fire while submerged, so Cormorant is a good bet to put on here. If you hover over the Gale, it doesn't say anything about that, which means that this might not fire while submerged. In fact, it definitely will not fire while submerged. Now, we also should go ahead and check out a few of the regular things. The Sprint right here cannot fire while submerged. And interestingly, one countermeasure that most of you probably forgot about is the Deep Sea countermeasure, which is damage type countermeasure, same as the damage type on the Cormorant anti-torpedo. And this thing can fire while submerged. However, I would not put the deep sea countermeasure on your ship because the mortar effect there is not very good. And if there are mortars in these targets, which there were on the VXP Weekend, that first one, we're going to have a pretty massive projectile speed on there. So I don't think deep sea countermeasures are going to work. In fact, I'm not even sure if the countermeasure portion works while you're submerged. It might only be the regular weapon here, the damage. Actually, this is just a countermeasure. So this thing will shoot when you're underwater, but I don't think it makes sense to equip this on the ship. Kixeye is probably going to do some weird thing which makes this countermeasure not work even though it's supposed to, so I'm going to hesitate to recommend this one. And the only countermeasure that you should be putting on your fleet entirely is the Cormorant anti-torpedo. Now, the question is here, how many of them should you put on your fleet? I think that yes, you should put them on there. That first VXP Weekend, they weren't working. The strategy guide says they're supposed to work, and every indication we've got from Kixeye is that they're supposed to work in the target. I expect in VXP Weekend number 2, and actually the raid, these things are for sure going to work. I wouldn't equip them just yet, maybe on that chance, but they are going to work. Now, Cormorants currently in the game, this was changed from when they were first implemented, actually work like Gales in the fact that they can fire multiple times at a single projectile. This means that you're going to want to have more than just one or two on your entire fleet, because if you miss your first volley, your second volley is going to come in and is going to be effective. The number that I'm going to recommend initially here is 8 across the entire fleet. And that's going to be 2 ships that have 4 each on there, because you are going to put some countermeasure specials on these that are going to benefit countermeasures. Therefore, it makes sense to have 1 or 2 other ships in the fleet, for instance, that are just damage ships only, and replace that countermeasure special with a damage increase special. Just a quick note about why I'm doing that in the first place. I think that 8 is a good starting point. I'm going to try and have 8 equipped by VXP Weekend so I can test with that one and see if I think firing extra times is going to help. Now, the accuracy here is pretty low, only at 60%. I don't believe there are any specials to increase damage type countermeasure accuracy, so enemy torpedoes are still going to get through, and it appears that the enemy torpedo projectile speed is pretty high, so even with 8 on the fleet, they might not fire a second time there, even if it's just 1 incoming torpedo, because your countermeasures need to have high enough projectile speed they can reach and intercept the enemy torpedo before it would hit your ships, for instance. I think that 8, like I said, is a pretty good number there. Maybe you want to go with 12 and try and reduce your damage a little bit further. The Cormorants are the only countermeasure, the only anti-whatever that you're going to need on the fleet. And that would be my recommendation for the safest possible build that makes the most sense in terms of what somebody would design around. So there are the specials here, or weapons rather, for at least 2 ships in the fleet. I'm going to build 2 of my back ships as this one. I think it's very unlikely that the flagship is going to have some sort of countermeasure specific thing. It's much more likely to be more damage focused or have higher armor points, which allows us to build it as an evade ship against Kingkiller. So that's my recommendation again, 2 ships in the fleet like this, the rest as damage ships, potentially 3 ships as countermeasure ships, and 2 ships as damage ships. In terms of armors, you saw in the thumbnail I had a big X on the explosive armor. That is because, based on the VXP targets, we actually can only take concussive damage. The only damage you actually take if you drive correctly is going to be from torpedoes. And for that reason, I think that 4 concussive armors is actually pretty possible this time around. Now, if you are going to go into the auto target and going to auto quite a bit, you are going to end up benefiting from some of the explosive. I would expect the auto target is going to take some damage from explosive. So you may want to put 1 or 2 still if you didn't intend to do a whole bunch of autoing. Although the 60k survival is not going to be a ton in comparison to 80k, I can't actually tell if this explosive survival at U3 is an additional 80k or is an additional 160k. That's something that we might have to check a little bit as we get closer to that one. In some cases, this plus 160 does not combine with this plus 80 and actually just overrides it, so maybe U3 should just say plus 80. So a few things to be aware of. And of course, we don't actually start with any base survival on here, but you do get enough from upgrades. I intend to have 4 ships here, U3, by the start of the raid, and we do have some survival here with the stacking aura, which I suppose is pretty nice here. So probably 3 concussive, 1 explosive is the safe thing, and will cost you fewer Forsaken mission points, but I could see an argument for using 4 of the concussive armor here. Although of course, if you want to be on the safe side, just go for 2 explosive anyway. It's not going to make a ton of difference because the survival numbers are already pretty high. Now, the last thing we have to talk about here is your specials. A few pretty standard options for this one. You're going to want to use the engine that came in the raid. This is a very, very minuscule upgrade from the previous tier 12 engine. This is 12.5, so you could just go ahead and use that old one anyway if you wanted to, and you're not going to lose too much damage or anything like that, too much survival rather. They're so close to being identical. I mean, 45k survival, 18% evade. We have 60k survival, 20% evade, and the combat speed here is the exact same. Very, very close if you use the Dark Light or the Shimmer Haze. Obviously, if you have it, the Shimmer Haze is better. Special slot number 2 is going to be only for the countermeasure ships, and that is the Mirror Maze defense system. As you can see, the stats that are important here are the concussive reload, which is nice, and countermeasure range and reload. This benefits damage type countermeasure only, which is the Cormorant anti-torpedoes that we're using have damage type countermeasure. So Mirror Maze is going to go on only your ships that have the anti-torpedoes on here. We also do want to use the lateral inhibition drive. This one came out with the ship and gives you a decent amount of concussive reload. The evade bonus is okay, but the bonus combat speed here is really, really nice. I don't know why they've thrown cloak efficiency on here. I would be extremely surprised if that meant we were able to start outranging some sonar in these targets. I really just think that that is a completely misleading stat, again, from someone who probably doesn't know how the subs have historically worked in this game here. But the evade is nice, combat speed is nice here. A concussive reload is a nice bonus. Our reload time is 3.8 seconds. It's going to get pretty low, maybe even close to that 0.2 minimum reload time. So that is a consideration you might want to make here. Equipping a few other things, we are going to want to use the hyperscan system. This gives your torpedoes extra critical chance and will change the critical damage from plus 100% to now be plus 200%. So every torpedo that hits now and does a critical is now going to do 3x damage as opposed to 2x damage without this special. The critical chance here is also plus 40%, which is pretty good, and I believe that stacks with R&D of 12, meaning half your shots are going to be criticals, which again is really, really nice. The last 2 specials here, we're going to throw in a few other things that are going to help your concussive damage. One of these is the Hexfire Gatling barrels. This is going to do some concussive damage. I mean, the splash is not very nice here, so you do need to consider that. Looking around here, there are not a ton of other options. We could go back to limited. I think this is a special I meant to recommend here. This is the Haywire's Speed Loader here, plus 90% concussive reload. Great, concussive damage is double. That's the one I had meant. They look so similar, you can't really tell them apart. So I definitely like this one. Now, for your last special across that's going to be consistent on your entire fleet, you do have a few different options. The one that I probably like the best is the Iron Feather Battery, which is actually limited. Again, you could actually use this one. The splash is obviously not helpful whatsoever. This was built for, I believe, the Impaler or something else that did some skirmish. So you do have some choices, but also the skirmish battery, all that stuff is so low stuff, you're not really going to want to use it. I think that, if the choice is between, say, the Iron Feather Battery that has splash damage reduction, again, works like survival at the best of times and only against explosive in this target, or the concussive splash Gatling guns if you get really, really close. So Iron Feather is a potential here. You could also try and use some critical stuff from down this way. Wouldn't really recommend that at this point. It works better with Gatling guns. So I think that the one I showed you, the Hexfire Gatling barrels at plus 65%, is going to be the way to go here, even though the splash is obviously not very helpful. So here is the build for the countermeasure ships, and I call them countermeasure ships, but they do a fair bit of damage in any case. Obviously, if you have the limited stuff, use that one. All the hash codes that I'm going to provide, by the way, my builds document, which I'll pop up right here, does show you all the hash codes. But this is only the build for the countermeasure ships. We do need a build for the damage ships only, and that build is going to be very, very slightly different. You're going to take, and again, all but 2, maybe all but 3 of your ships should be damage ships, so 2 or 3 countermeasure, 2 or 3 damage. I'm going to put, obviously, the limited torpedo across all of the slots here, and change the Mirror Maze defense system. This is the one that gives your benefits to countermeasures, and of course it does have some concussive reload. That's not very much though. I'm going to take this one off, and instead I'm going to put on the next best skirmish damage special, which is the one I talked about a little bit earlier, the Iron Feather Battery. This will increase and do plus 55% concussive damage, which again is really nice. You could look at some of these older things here. I don't really think it's worth doing that, and yeah, Iron Feather Battery is really just the best option, although. And whenever I'm showing you a special, I do try and at least hover over the second best options if I don't call them out by name. So here's the final build. Again, 2 or 3 damage ships, 2 or 3 countermeasure ships. Obviously should add up to 4 or 5 depending on what you are using. And we will have a VXP weekend again this weekend. A huge thank you to the channel members whose names appear on the end screen now. They're helping keep the channel running and are why I can provide things like the build stock. If you find that doc or these videos helpful and want to support, you can click the join button on YouTube. As always, and until next time, this is Derpy signing out, helping you be a better pirate.